Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 20160 in the name of Fulton McGregor on improving support and treatment for people living with PKU in Scotland. The debate will be concluded without any questions being posed. I'd ask members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible, and I invite Fulton McGregor to open the debate around 7 minutes. Mr McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin this debate by warmly welcoming members of the National Society for Phenylketonuria who are here in the gallery today, and also want to acknowledge all those living with the condition, their families and carers. Your presence is a powerful reminder of why this debate matters, and it is, of course, Presiding Officer, a privilege to open this discussion, and I'm grateful to the members who have supported the motion and those who remain to contribute. Phenylketonuria, or PKU as it will be referred to, is a rare and inherited metabolic condition. Individuals with PKU lack the enzyme required to metabolise phenylalanine, an amino acid found in nearly all proteins. When phenylalanine builds up in the blood and brain, it becomes toxic, causing irreversible neurological damage, cognitive impairment and behavioural challenges. While PKU is usually diagnosed shortly after birth, through the newborn heel prick test, the treatment it demands continues every day of a person's life with no opportunity to pause or take a break. Managing PKU is unrelentingly complex. Every meal must be precisely calculated. Ordinary foods such as meat, dairy, eggs, bread, pasta and even most grains are largely prohibited. The majority of daily nutrition comes from synthetic protein substitutes, which are chemically derived and are often unpalatable, and specially manufactured low-protein foods, which can be difficult to access consistently. Patients rely on these foods to maintain adequate nutrition, but supply issues and prescription inconsistencies remain a real challenge. For families, the burden is significant. Parents often spend upwards of 19 hours a week preparing special meals and carefully managing protein intake. Many reduce or give up paid work to provide the level of care required, with, unsurprisingly, mothers bearing the majority of this responsibility. Surveys show that more than 80% of PKU-related care is carried out by women. The mental health impact of these responsibilities is profound. Carers report stress and, in some cases, clinically significant psychological distress. Daily life is meticulously planned and social participation is often restricted. Children and teenagers face the additional pressure of fitting in with peers while maintaining a restrictive diet, which can contribute to disordered eating patterns, low self-esteem and social isolation. Adults with PKU face their own set of challenges. While paediatric metabolic services are widely recognised and valued, the transition to adult care can be fraught with gaps. Many adults are no longer seen regularly by special metabolic clinics, leaving them at risk of cognitive decline and psychological distress. Evidence from NSPKU research shows that only a minority of adults achieve the recommended blood phenylalanine levels, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the practical difficulty of maintaining a highly restrictive diet without ongoing support. Some adults must also travel long distances to access specialist clinics, and staffing shortages exacerbate delays in treatment initiation or monitoring. The social and cognitive consequences of PKU are profound. Even well-managed cases show subtle but meaningful reductions in attention, processing speed, executive function, working memory and cognitive flexibility compared to unaffected peers. Poor metabolic control in adolescents and adults is associated with anxiety, depression, reduced social functioning and difficulty managing complex tasks. Disengagement from dietary treatment often creates a cycle in which parents are less able to access services and support, with serious long-term implications. Emerging treatments do bring hope, but also underline the need for timely adoption. Sapropreptin, a synthetic form of tetrahydrooctreotide, I apologise to the fucking gallery if I've not pronounced that right, improves phenylalanine metabolism in a subset of patients, allowing for a less restrictive diet and a reduction in treatment burden. Yeah, and I heard today, actually from Caroline Graham from the service, that her own children have benefited greatly, in fact in a life-changing way, from this drug. But yet in Scotland, delays in assessment and initiation mean that some adults who could benefit from sapropreptin remain without access. Sepiapterin, a newly licensed treatment internationally, works for a higher proportion of patients and offers the possibility of a more normal diet, yet has not yet been approved in the UK. And I think that Scotland must be positioned to adopt these new therapies swiftly, ensuring that no patient is left behind, because the outcomes for getting these drugs can be absolutely life-changing and should be made available. Home monitoring technologies offer additional transformative potential. Devices such as the EGU system allow patients to measure blood phenylalanine levels at home with near-instant results. This reduces anxiety and uncertainty, enables more informed day-to-day decisions, and reduces reliance on clinic visits or delayed laboratory feedback. For patients and families, such technology represents independence, reassurance, greater confidence in day-to-day management, reduced anxiety and improved long-term metabolic control. Swift licensing and integration of these devices into the Scottish NHS would be a significant step forward, and I hope the Minister can perhaps reflect on that in her closing remarks. Maternal PKU presents unique challenges. High phenylalanine levels during pregnancy are toxic to the developing fetus and can cause congenital heart defects, microphthalmia or reduced IQ. Yet with strict metabolic control and careful monitoring, women with PKU can have healthy children. Supporting women of childbearing age with appropriate education and access to treatments such as saprapropin and, in future, sepiapterin, it is vital to ensure safe pregnancies and reduce anxiety and stress for expectant mothers. Today's debate also allows us to consider the broader social implications. PKU management places substantial responsibility on families, shaping their routine, work, social life and mental health. Carers frequently bear enormous emotional and practical burdens, while patients may experience social exclusion or stigma. The NSPKU has highlighted that these burdens are often invisible, yet they are real, persistent, deeply felt in an aspect of daily life. Recognising and addressing them must form part of any comprehensive approach to PKU care in Scotland. The evidence is clear. PKU does not only affect individual patients, but whole families and communities. It highlights the importance of preventative and ongoing care, equitable access to therapies and a holistic approach to support that incorporates mental, emotional and social well-being. Families repeatedly report that access to specialist dietitians, metabolic clinics and emerging treatments is not consistent across Scotland, and this inequity leads to disparities in outcomes and can contribute to lifelong health inequalities. For those in more remote areas, the challenge is even greater. This debate tonight presents an opportunity to consider policy, research and resource allocation simultaneously. We must ask ourselves how Scotland can ensure timely rollout of these new therapies, equitable access to specialist clinics, adoption of home monitoring technologies and recognition of the invisible care burden. People in the gallery and across Scotland are relying on it. We must also consider how best to support the mental health and social well-being of patients and families, particularly during the transition from paediatric to adult services. Presiding Officer, the NSPKU has been tireless in advocating for the PKU community. Its members have worked for decades to raise awareness, ensure access to treatments and provide support to patients and families. Their research and advocacy highlight urgent needs: equitable access to specialist adult care, timely rollout of new therapies, integration of home monitoring technologies, support for mental health and recognition of the invisible care burden. Addressing these issues offers the opportunity to reduce health inequalities, improve quality of life and ensure that all patients in Scotland can access the care they require. And I encourage all members to engage with NSPKU and hear directly from constituents affected by this condition. And I know that many did in the recent drop-in that I hosted here in this Parliament. Presiding Officer, just to finish, I wanted to read out some quotes that have been provided to me by NSPKU. The first two quotes refer to dealing with the condition. The first one is, I found myself scrabbling on the floor with a brush and shovel to collect the measured frozen peas my toddler threw on the floor, so I could re-weigh them to work out how many exchanges he had not eaten. Then I could weigh something else to replace them, like sweet corn. And a second one, she resents the fact that her family can eat normally and she can't. At mealtimes she will go into a depression. Often she will ask to eat crumbs of normal bread off her plates, or we watch her licking her plates. It's awful to see. And I can see you're asking me to wind up, Presiding Officer, but I think those two quotes are a very good place to end and to highlight the challenges that families and individuals face. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McGregor. We move to the open debate. I call first Annie Wells, to be followed by Paul McLennan. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I would like to thank Fulton McGregor for bringing this very important topic to the Chamber. And I do feel privileged to speak about phenylketonuria, known as PKU, a rare inherited metabolic condition and a serious issue facing people living with it here in Scotland. PKU affects how the body breaks down phenylalanine, a natural part of protein which, when levels build up in the blood, they cause damage to the brain. That damage is permanent and cannot be reversed. In Scotland, babies are diagnosed early through newborn screening, and that early diagnosis is vital. But diagnosis is only the beginning. Living with PKU is a lifelong and demanding. For decades, the main treatment had been a highly restrictive low-protein diet. Protein intake, as we've heard, must be tightly controlled every day for life. Even when this diet is followed extremely well, there is evidence of ongoing effects of brain health, so we must consider the impact on those who struggle to maintain such a strict regime over many years. The reality is that this dietary treatment places a huge burden on individuals and families. And on hearing that I was speaking in this debate, my friend and former colleague Alison Harris got in touch with me as her family has experienced PKU firsthand. Her cousin John and his late wife Anne-Marie had 3 children, all living with PKU. Throughout their entire lives, they've had to be extremely careful, and Anne-Marie and John have worked tirelessly to ensure that they are on the correct diet. That experience reflects what many families across Scotland face quietly every day. It affects education, employment, mental well-being and social life. It requires constant planning and monitoring with very little flexibility. That is why the medicine sapropterin, also known as BH4, which was approved for NHS use in Scotland in 2022, is so important. For some people with PKU, BH4 can significantly reduce phenylalanine levels and allow a less restrictive diet. It doesn't remove all the dietary requirement limits, but it can reduce daily pressures and improve quality of life. For those who can access it, it is genuinely life-changing. However, despite being approved and available, many adults in Scotland are unable to access this treatment, not because it wouldn't work for them, but because the pathway required to start it, including response testing, is not consistently available. So this itself raises fundamental issues. A medicine that exists but cannot be accessed is not delivering any benefit. Availability on paper is not the same as access in practice. Presiding Officer, I would like to ask the Scottish Government for a clear commitment. Will the Scottish Government commit to identifying and removing the barriers that are preventing people with PKU from accessing BH4 in Scotland? And will it commit to supporting those individuals now rather than leaving them reliant on diet alone? Despite clear evidence, the diet is not always enough. Looking ahead, Scotland must also be ready to evaluate and adopt future treatments such as sapropterin without unnecessary delay, so that people living with PKU are not left waiting for years for access once again. This is not about convenience, it's about protecting brain health, reducing lifelong harm and recognising the limits of dietary treatment. PKU may be rare, but its impact is lifelong. Families are doing everything asked of them. It's time for the system to meet them with the same level of commitment. Scotland can do better for people living with PKU, and we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wells. I now call Paul McLennan to be followed by Carol Mockler in 4 minutes. Please, Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to speak in support of this motion, and thanks to Fulton McGregor for bringing that forward. And it's about obviously recognising PKU. It's a rare, lifelong metabolic condition that places a significant and often invisible burden on those who live with it and on their families. It's not something that can be managed occasionally or partially. It requires constant attention from infancy throughout life. Without strict dietary management, the consequences can be severe and irreversible, particularly neurological damage affecting learning, cognition and mental health. That reality shapes every single day, every meal, every social interaction for people living with PKU. For those families, food is not simply food. It's calculation, its vigilance and its planning ahead in ways most of us never have to consider. Everyday foods that many of us take for granted are simply not options that affect school meals, work, social occasions and travel, and it places a sustained mental and emotional load on individuals and carers alike. I recently met with members of the board of the National Society for PKU. I listened directly to people with lived experience of PKU. What came through very clearly was not only the clinical reality of the condition, but the importance of consistency, predictability and clear communication in the support people receive. The recent drop-in event organised by Fulton and McGregor, held here in the Parliament, provided a valuable opportunity to hear those experiences directly and to understand current challenges in navigating care pathways. The motion rightly highlights two developments that offer a real potential to improve quality of life. First of all, ongoing UK trials of home blood, excuse my pronunciation, phenylalanine monitoring device, and the stakeholders have highlighted the ability to monitor levels accurately at home could significantly reduce stress, improve control and support better day-to-day management. Second, the emerging treatment cepiapterine. We've heard evidence of how, for some people, this treatment could increase dietary tolerance and ease the relentless burden of restriction that defines daily life with PKU. However, families and clinicians have been clear that innovation must be matched by clarity and consistency in how guidance is implemented in practice. People with PKU report inconsistency in how pathways are applied and how quickly individuals can access support. They want confidence that the national guidance translates into predictable, equitable care wherever they live in Scotland. Now, I recognise that PKU care sits within the nationally commissioned inherited metabolic disorder services with established clinical governance and decision-making structures. The ask from families is not to bypass these systems, but to ensure they work consistently and transparently for patients. If we are serious about improving long-term outcomes, then strengthening services means more than recognising new developments. It means ensuring clear pathways, timely communication and the capacity within services to respond as evidence and treatment evolve. The matter for families and constituencies like Keith who should be able to rely on a system that supports them over the longer term, rather than one that feels uncertain or fragmented. President Officer, people living with PKU already shoulder a heavy responsibility every single day. Our role is to ensure that public services support them effectively, consistently and with compassion. I fully recognise the nationally commissioned nature of inherited metabolic disorder services and the clinical governance arrangements in place. The question families ask is whether that national framework delivers consistently, as I've said before. Respecting established appraisal and governance routes should go hand in hand with readiness in pathways, service capacity and in communications. This debate is not about bypassing clinical decision-making, but ensuring transparency, consistency and competence for families navigating a lifelong condition. If the system is intended to be national and trans-standardised, it should be possible to demonstrate that lived experience reflects that ambition. I'm pleased to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McLennan. And I call Carol Mochan to be followed by Rona Mackay. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Fulton McGregor for bringing this debate to the Parliament today and welcome the guests in the Chamber, and also really thank the people who came along to the Parliament to update us on this really important issue. I think it was last week or the week before. As others have said, PKU is a rare but treatable inherited disorder which prevents the normal breakdown of the amino acid phenylalanine, a natural component of protein, and it results in build-up in the blood and brain. And as others have said, it's managed through a specialist diet which avoids these very high protein foods such as meat and dairy. But I think, as Fulton McGregor indicated, it's immensely complex. The other point is delays in treatment can cause long-term health problems, which is why we really need early diagnosis. That's crucial. But the complexity of this diet, as we've heard, mean that people on a PKU diet really have a very restricted intake and really quite a different life when it comes to the things we all take for granted. And I think it is the human element of all of this that we are discussing today. What impact does this have on people's lives? Members will know many years ago, I worked as a dietitian within the NHS. And I've heard other members talking about the role of dietitians, and people who have contacted me have raised the important role of dietitians. And I worked as a dietitian within the NHS, and during my time I did support a small number of people and their families with PKU. At that time, not only was the dietary regime. It was very restrictive, I remember that, but the amino acid substitute was very, very difficult to take. And this experience really gave me a feeling for how one's family life can be changed by just one event. A family member with PKU means you think about and look at food in a very different way. Your daily timetable changes, the things you enjoy change, and this is why families are so concerned to make sure the use of modern treatments are available for their loved ones. I would like to talk about the experiences of a mum who reached out to me ahead of the debate. She has 2 sons who were diagnosed as newborns and began receiving sapropterin, after it was approved in 2022. Now, I will check the official records to make sure the correct drug is there in the spelling, because a lot of the medications, as you know, sound quite similar. But following a successful treatment, their daily protein tolerance increased from 10 grams a day to 28 grams, before increasing to 38 and 39 grams. Now, Mum had to talk to the medics about increasing that further. And to just give you some perspective on grams of protein, what that actually means, when the boys were on 38 grams and 39 grams of protein, they could eat only some vegan diets, dairy and gluten-free products, and they still took about 150 tablets a day. Now they have managed to increase their tolerance by using this drug and increasing this drug, their tolerance to 68 grams and 72 grams of protein. And this has given them real freedom, and now only on 36 tablets a day. And I think it's when you hear these things that it makes such a difference. It's truly remarkable to hear how much their lives had changed since assessing this drug. However, the point I want to raise is that the journey to this point was by no means easy. Mum had to fight hard for treatment. She knew this was readily available in other parts of the UK and Europe, but her experience was that the guidelines and best practice weren't easy to navigate, weren't consistent for people and families. And so Scottish patients appear to be getting treated differently. And of course, what mums who have had this positive experience want is for other families to just get that benefit. So I think it's probably not unique, this experience, but I think it's an important example of why we have to see if the Minister can just look into this and see if we can make sure this is more equitably treated in Scotland for patients. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Douglas Ross. Around 4 minutes. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, can I thank my colleague Fulton McGregor for bringing this much-needed debate to the Chamber. This debate is so important as the condition is relatively rare, and we absolutely need to raise awareness of it. And can I welcome those who are in the Chamber tonight too. Until a few months ago, when I was contacted by a constituent, I was completely unaware of PKU. And as a former journalist of several decades and an MSP of nearly a decade, that doesn't usually happen. Presiding Officer, I don't believe there should be a hierarchy on research and treatments of any medical condition. Cancer, heart condition, diabetes, MS, MND and PKU must be treated as conditions which benefit equally from research, access to medicine and treatments. As Fulton McGregor articulated, PKU is a rare inherited metabolic condition in which the body can't properly break down the amino acid phenylalanine, a natural component of protein. It's usually diagnosed shortly after birth through the newborn heel prick blood test, which has been in place in the UK since 1969. And as with all conditions, early diagnosis is essential for the best outcome. The condition affects around 1 in 10,000 people across the UK and in Scotland 1 in 8,000. As we've heard, people with PKU lack a functioning enzyme required to metabolise phenylalanine. As a result, it builds up in the blood and brain where it's toxic and can cause irreversible brain damage if not controlled. Presiding Officer, my constituent Jamie is a remarkable young woman who's lived with the condition all of her life. With the help of her supportive family and friends, she certainly has not let it hold her back. She's at the forefront of the campaign for better awareness and access to treatment for sufferers. She was one of the first patients in Scotland to be prescribed sapropterin, and she's just learned she will now be given a higher dose, which will mean a far greater quality of life for her. However, Jamie says monitoring PHE levels is expensive and slow, with blood tests taking several days to complete. They're to be sent to Glasgow by post to be analysed, and when the results are returned, they're already several days out of date. Funding new home monitoring test equipment for all patients would give instant understanding of blood levels and save money. For example, pregnant women need to submit 2 tests per week for analysis, and at £1.70 for a first-class stamp now, that's a significant cost to the patient. Presiding Officer, PKU patients in the UK had to wait 10 years longer than across Europe and the Americas for access to sapropterin, so a delay of new treatments coming through will simply be unacceptable. The drug isn't suitable for everyone, and the condition must be managed by a severely restricted diet. The dietetic team in Glasgow are managing services across Scotland, but are understaffed and struggling to support patients at the moment. The recently retired dietitian in Glasgow, Barbara Cochrane, who for so many years strongly advocated for PKU patients, must be commended. She's described as someone for whom nothing was too much trouble, a massive well of enthusiasm and energy. Another issue that must be addressed is that there's no comprehensive national patient registry. As a result, the total number of people living with PKU in Scotland and the UK isn't precisely known. Untreated PKU leads to profound and irreversible intellectual disability, seizures and behavioural problems, and this damage can't be reversed, making early and sustained treatment essential. As mentioned, it's important to remember the majority of people with PKU remain reliant upon dietary treatment, as the majority of patients don't respond to the drug. With the exception of fruit and some vegetables, there are very few ordinary foods that can be eaten freely. And this is very difficult, particularly for young people trying to enjoy a normal social life. And as we've heard, dietary management, when it breaks down, families may face involvement from social services, and huge problems can result from that. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, PKU is a lifelong condition with serious consequences if poorly controlled. Patients and families continue to shoulder an extraordinary burden through restrictive diets, unequal access to therapies and limited support for self-management. So it's time to end this health inequality now, address the issues debated here tonight and deliver fairer care for people living with PKU in Scotland. It's the very least they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. Before calling the next speaker, just to encourage all members who wish to speak in the debate to make sure their buttons are pressed. With that, I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Monica Lyon in around 4 minutes. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I also congratulate Fulton McGregor for securing this debate and to welcome representatives in the gallery listening, and also I know those watching at home, because I have constituents in the Highlands who haven't been able to make it here tonight, but we're very keen to follow this debate. And in a number of the briefings that we've had, and in some of the contributions, this has been described as a misunderstood disease. I think it's worse than that. I completely agree with Rona Mackay. I had no knowledge of this at all. Although I say that, I'm almost certain it would have been mentioned to me at least twice in my life when my boys were born, because this heel prick test has been in place since 1969, and I'm almost certain, with Alistair at Dr Gray's and James at ARI, I would have asked the doctor and the nurse what that was for, but because there was never any follow-up, it completely went out of my mind. And the constituent's case that I'm going to be discussing most tonight had a similar experience. Her daughter is now 5 and had this test with both her son and then her daughter, and got a phone call to say we need to discuss this heel prick test a couple of weeks later. And, she almost broke down. She thought, this can't be good. And that family then had to learn more about this. And because it is a rare disease, it was difficult for that particular family. And I found it difficult trying to work out in my head how we would have managed as a family if one of our children was diagnosed like that, and indeed how people manage with this on an ongoing basis. And the reception which my constituent came down to, that Fulton McGregor hosted in December, was an excellent reception for 2 reasons. One, we heard these direct examples from people who either live with it themselves or look after people, particularly younger children, with PKU. And the second thing was the table in front of us in Committee Room 3, I think it was, that had packets of the supplement, which I'll come on to in a moment, but also Tupperware boxes, tiny Tupperware boxes of each amount of bread and pasta and rice. And you could count the grains of rice that was in it. And I had no idea this is what people are having to do on a daily basis. Then to come on to the supplement, again, I spoke to some people who control their PKU through taking these supplements, and they tried to describe to me the taste of them, and it is awful. And to imagine having to take these supplements because of this condition, something that is severely unpleasant, is clearly a need why we need medical advancement. And we have had that with a number of the drugs that have been mentioned here today. One of the drugs that has recently been introduced, that Rona Mackay was speaking about, is not suitable for my constituent's daughter. She's got a gene that doesn't allow that drug to work for her. So we do need further advancements in the area of the drugs. But another point I want to mention in the debate tonight is the dietetics team, the dietitians, and the resources there, because there is clearly a lack of resources across the country. And the Minister, like I, represents a rural and a remote area. My constituents in Inverness have a link to Raigmore, but the dietitians looking at PKU in Raigmore stopped face-to-face discussions with individuals and families in 2020, and they've never been restarted again. So I would be interested to hear from the Minister if she feels that is acceptable, because this family have a daughter who is 5 who has never seen her dietitian face-to-face. All of the discussions, all of the debate, and all of the information that the dietitian needs and the family needs in return is done online. Now, there is a place for online consultations, but I don't think that should be the only route forward. So I would like to see advancements in the drugs available. These drugs will be different for each individual, and also increased resources for these dietitians and others to ensure that families feel supported. Because if any of us had to go through what the families in the gallery and those watching at home have had to go through, you would want as much support as close to home as possible. And I think those living with PKU and their families deserve that, and they deserve that now. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call Monica Lennon to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes, please, Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by thanking Fulton McGregor for securing this debate, and to colleagues who have taken part. It is really important that the voices of the PKU community are heard in the Scottish Parliament. As we've heard, PKU is a rare inherited metabolic condition that demands an extraordinary level of discipline. It is a relentless 24/7 commitment to a diet so restrictive that most of us would struggle for even a single day, never mind a lifetime. Yet for the PKU community, this is a necessity to prevent irreversible neurological damage. I want to join colleagues in paying tribute to the National Society for Phenylketonuria. Their advocacy is, of course, the reason we are here. I also want to thank the individuals and families who did attend the recent drop-in event. It was excellent. Their bravery in sharing the realities of their lived experience is what drives policy change, and it was a pleasure to meet them all and to see some faces in the gallery. I want to mention, of course, Mags Lappin from Blantyre, which is my hometown. And Mags first contacted me a few years ago to tell me about this condition, about her daughter, Caris. And Caris is an adult. So Mags has a lot of experience. She is a tireless campaigner, but she shouldn't have to be. Parents and caregivers are exhausted. What has really struck me, and the thing I want the Minister to really take from my contribution tonight, is that Mags has an adult daughter, but she's describing the current state of Scottish clinical services for adult PKU patients as frightening. In her own words, Mags has witnessed a demise in care. She recalls a time when Glasgow had a world-class metabolic team. To see those services erode to the point where she believes we've gone back 30 years is simply heartbreaking. So we need to get a response to that. The motion tonight highlights 2 game changers: the home blood monitoring and CP-apterin. Again, I've probably not said that properly. Currently, patients use dry blood spots, pricking their finger and mailing a card to a lab, then waiting days for a result. That's like a person with diabetes having to wait a week to know their blood sugar. That wouldn't be acceptable. New trials of point-of-care devices allow for results in under 30 minutes via a smartphone app. It doesn't just provide data, it provides freedom and the ability to make real-time dietary adjustments. Likewise, the Affinity Phase 3 trials for CP-apterin have shown incredible promise. In these trials, nearly 73% of participants saw a significant reduction in blood phenylalanine. Again, you can tell I'm not a clinician, and some were even able to double or triple their daily protein intake. For a PKU patient, that is the difference between a life of medical formula and the ability to eat a more normal meal. However, innovation is no use if it doesn't reach the patient. In the case of Cara, she was only able to trial CP-apterin because her mum would not let it go. But even then, she was only at half the European guideline dosage. So, in closing, Presiding Officer, I would ask the Minister to take a look at why in Scotland we are seeing patients receiving treatment that goes against international guidelines and standards set across the rest of the UK. We need to look at these chronic staffing shortages that leave families feeling behind and abandoned. Adult care in particular at the moment appears to be totally unacceptable. So we need accountability, we need dedicated metabolic dietitians and a commitment to these new technologies. We cannot allow the clock to tick backwards. Mags and Caris and many others have fought for long enough, and we need to make sure that we have PKU services for everyone in Scotland that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. Before calling the next speaker, I'm minded on the basis of allowing all those that do want to participate in the debate a chance to do so, to accept a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes. I call on Fulton McGregor to move such a motion.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I therefore call Christine Graham to be followed by Katie Clark. Around 4 minutes, Ms Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate the member on securing this debate and the guests in the gallery, and apologise when unable to meet the event in December. I'm going to be quite clean here and say I knew nothing about PKU till this debate. But when I spoke to Fulton McGregor very briefly and asked him what it was about, and he says, I want to find out. 27 years here, never had it mentioned, nobody's mentioned it to me. A bit like Douglas Ross, it was the pricking of the heel. I want to tell my constituents about it. Now, what I'm going to summarise may have mistakes in it because it's been gleaned from members' contributions here. As I understand it, broadly, and I'm going to try to pronounce the clinical terms, it's to do with a failure to process appropriately proteins. It's inherited, it's incurable, and the damaging is neurological and very serious. This means that you've got to calculate what you're eating, how you're eating it, to almost the single frozen pea. And there was an example, I think I heard, of a toddler, and it's bad enough feeding a toddler in any time, but having to feed a toddler, calculating, knowing it could have devastating effects if it's not done properly. And it took me onwards to think about what happens when you go to nursery, what happens when you go to primary, secondary, what happens when you're going to a pal's birthday party. It's a ripple that extends out throughout your children, particularly children who won't understand why for a very, very long time, and will certainly resent it and have huge stress on the partner who's dealing with it. And as I understand it, it's usually the women in the family. It means people have to give up their work. They therefore lose income. I mean, it's just, the ripples are enormous. The challenges are huge. I heard too that there are certain therapies. I've heard that there are certain drugs. I don't think they've gone before SMC yet, the Scottish Medicines Consortium, that may alleviate it. What I also heard about dietitians, when I heard from the colleague here who's been a dietitian, what is required. I represent the Borders of Midlothian, and I have no idea How many people in my constituency have PKU? You have no idea what the facilities are, but it's not going to stop there, because I'm going to find out. Because what I intend to do after this debate is to put this link to this debate on my Facebook and to ask people if they will tell me if they know about this, what's happening in their area. And I'm going to also write to NH Borders and ask what facilities they have in place. You see, we all know about allergies, but peanut allergies and milk allergies or this, that and the oatcake. But not to know about this fundamental, very serious, devastating inherited disease, to me, is a sadness. But that's the good thing about members' debates, I say to Mr McGregor. We have these debates. Sometimes I don't like them because they're controversial, they're really party political. This is not. This is an issue that deserves, if I may so say, like Tourette's a few months back, to bring something that's a minority, but a very serious and important minority issue, into the public arena. So as I've said, I'm going to put this on my Facebook, I'm going to ask about it, I'm going to find out what's happening in my constituency. I say to the guests there, that's one thing. You've educated a politician, and that's no mean feat. You've educated a politician, that politician is going to endeavour to educate her constituents, and I hope that is helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Graham. We now call the final speaker in the open debate, Katie Clark. Around 4
minutes. Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I also would like to thank Fulton McGregor for securing this debate and for his work on this issue. Like Christine Graham, I didn't know about this condition until I was contacted by constituents in the lead up to the event before Christmas. And I think it is surprising that so many of us knew so little about this condition. So I would like to pay tribute to my constituents who've shared their personal experiences with me, and I'm glad that some of them have been able to join us in the public gallery this evening. As already has been touched on by other members, PKU is a rare and lifelong metabolic disorder which can lead to severe and irreversible neurological damage without strict dietary management. And as Rona Mackay said, it's estimated that around 1 in 8,000 people across Scotland are currently living with PKU. A significant daily burden is placed by individuals with PKU and their families as a result of the condition, with the need for constant monitoring of their diet and to avoid consuming many everyday foods such as bread. And I think those of us that sat down and spoke to people that are directly affected have been quite impressed and astonished by the impact that it has and the amount of work that they are involved in attempting to manage the condition. Many children with PKU are more likely to suffer from issues with their attention levels and ability to process information, which affects their educational attainment. And as has already been said in the debate, a lot of young people and adults with PKU are more likely to suffer from social isolation, poor mental health and physical health issues. And almost half of parents have had to reduce their working hours to give up working altogether to provide the necessary dietary care to their children with PKU. So it's quite clear that this has an impact on many aspects of public policy and that it's important that there's a higher awareness across the public sector of this condition. I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what steps that the Scottish Government are taking to improve support for both individuals with PKU and their families to address these issues. And I would say to the Minister, it's quite clear that it's not just an issue that affects her own portfolio, but one of the issues I think that was concerning with the meetings I had around the event in December was people who had experience of how these matters are dealt with, both here in Scotland but also in England, who say that in terms of some of the medical care available, that they're doing better down south, and that would be something I'd be grateful if the Minister perhaps could respond on in her contribution. We know that lifelong monitoring of PKU is also vital to both safeguard health and reduce the risk of avoidable harms, yet the experience of many of those living with PKU suggests that the current provision of care by the Inherited Metabolic Disease Service is inadequate. That's a point that's been made by a number of constituents. There are stories of no face-to-face meetings being provided, years going by between appointments and individuals disengaging from care altogether due to a lack of regular specialist follow-up. So it would be helpful if the Minister perhaps could respond to that in her summing up. We know it's not individuals. Just individuals with PKU have been experiencing issues with the Inherited Metabolic Disease Services, with charities such as the Genetic Alliance Scotland highlighting similarly inadequate care being provided to those with rare diseases. So I look forward to the Minister perhaps responding to some of the points that I've made, and I would also like to reiterate some of the points that have been made by other members in terms of the availability of specific medications which do help those that get access to them.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call on Jenny Mintot to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too welcome the opportunity to respond to today's motion on phenylketonuria. I'm going to use PKU for the rest of my speech because, like others, I haven't got a medical background, so absolutely recognise the tongue twisters that we seem to be approaching tonight. I would also like to recognise the experiences of individuals and families across Scotland who live with this rare and lifelong metabolic disorder. I too would like to thank Fulton McGregor for tabling this really important motion and welcome everyone to the Scottish Parliament. It is your Scottish Parliament. And the event that you held in the Parliament, I think, by everybody's contributions tonight, just shows the importance of being able to raise that awareness amongst MSPs and ministers is so incredibly important. And like Christine Graham, I was reflecting on a debate I responded to late last year on aphasia and the fact that here are two really important debates that members in this Parliament can help raise awareness and challenge what the Scottish Government is doing and ensure that the Scottish Government speaks to health boards as well. Christine Graham's absolutely right. This is not party political. I also want to extend my sincere thanks to the National Society for PKU and to everyone who attended the drop-in event in December. Their advocacy and willingness to share the realities of living with PKU are absolutely invaluable. I think Paul McLennan's point that food is a calculation really stuck with me, and being shown the traffic light system as it was explained to me was very, very powerful, and I know that other members have talked about that too. And I think it's fair to say that those people that I met that were living with PKU described a life of constant challenges, only living with red, amber and green. But once they were able to access sapropterin, life was more like a rainbow. And I took very much the point that Katie Clark made as well around social isolation. Douglas Ross's points about his constituent, I'd be very pleased if he could write to me on that, and I'm very happy to look into the situation in NHS Highland. The reason I shook my head, just to confirm, is I don't like describing any of our constituencies as remote. Remote is a state of mind, so let's look at it like that. The Scottish Government is committed to improving the care and support available to people living with rare conditions, including those with PKU. And I would just like to pass on the Cabinet Secretary's apologies for not being in the debate. This is a subject that is very close to his heart, and I know when he was a member of Parliament down in Westminster, he worked very hard with the NSPKU and many of his constituents, and I would like to pass on his gratitude to the very clear arguments that were provided to him to improve the service. We are equally committed to listening to lived if I can just make a bit of progress, please. We're equally committed to listening to lived experience and to working collaboratively with clinicians, patient groups, the third sector and our counterparts across the UK. Their insights and partnership working are essential in shaping services that truly meet people's needs. And a number of people have asked about the work that the Scottish Government is doing, and I would like to confirm that the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer will be meeting with the Chair of the Medical Advisory Panel at the National Society for PKU early in February to discuss the challenges experienced by people living with PKU in obtaining specialised low-protein food products on the NHS. And I know, given that the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer is in the chamber tonight, she will have heard many of the points that have been raised, and I will be asking her to ensure that they are reflected in her conversations. Monica Lennon.
Monica Lennon.
The mic's on. I'm grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention, and I'm encouraged by her remarks so far. Does she agree it's really important that we get it right for every single PKU patient, including those who have other health conditions or maybe neurodivergent? One of my constituents has been in touch about her children who live with PKU. They also are autistic. Their health outcomes right now are awful. I won't go into detail, but I would appreciate the chance to speak to the Minister about that, and perhaps she could meet with that family, because there are people with other challenges as well, and they are not having their needs met.
Minister, and give you the time back.
I completely recognise the fact that so many people in Scotland are living with more than one condition, and it is important that we as a government recognise that. I believe we do, and we have to work, as I've said earlier, with health boards to ensure that the patient, the person, is at the centre of that care. So very happy to have a further conversation with Ms Lennon with regard to that. A number of people have commented on the fact that this is deemed as a rare disease. Scotland has its first rare disease action plan, and this plan is designed to tackle what genuinely matters to individuals and families. And we will work closely with the community through the Scotland's Rare Disease Implementation Board to ensure the plan is delivered effectively. As many people have noted, PKU specialist care in Scotland is delivered through the Inherited Metabolic Disorders Service, nationally commissioned by NHS National Services Directorate. And as Rona Mackay, Katie Clark and Monica Lennon all noted, that there have been some staff concerns in that area. Now, as I understand it, the IMD service has been carrying a clinical lead vacancy for some months. This post has been advertised and interviews will take place this month. So I hope that goes some way to alleviate the situation, but recognise that it's something that I think we need to spend a bit more time looking at, and I appreciate people's contributions. With respect to new and existing medicines, the Scottish Government remains firmly committed to increasing the availability of medicines that the people of Scotland need. Through the Scottish Medicines Consortium, we have a robust independent process for assessing the clinical and cost effectiveness of new medicines, which ensure value for both patients and the NHS. I would like to briefly clarify, if possible, Presiding Officer, the current position to access to medicines for people living with PKU in Scotland, because I know it's important for families. The branded version of Saproterin, known as Kuvan, was assessed by the SMC in 2018. At that time, it wasn't recommended for routine use in the NHS in Scotland because the evidence provided by the pharmaceutical company did not demonstrate its cost effectiveness. The company chose not to resubmit to the SMC. In 2021, the first generic version of Saproterin was licensed in the UK. Generic medicines are medicines out with their patent period, so can be manufactured and supplied by a number of companies. The assessment of generic medicines falls outside the scope of the SMC. To support access, a procurement exercise was undertaken by NHS National Procurement, resulting in a significant discount in the generic price. I noticed that Fulton McGregor, if I take Fulton McGregor very quickly, because I have another event.
Fulton McGregor, briefly.
Thanks to the Minister for taking the intervention. She's maybe actually going to go on to talk about this. I just wondered if she and the Government were aware of the 3 drugs, the Saproterin, as she's mentioned, which can help roughly about 20 to 30% of patients, but the other one that's been mentioned today as well, septiapterin, which can help a further third of patients. And then I think I'm right in saying there's clinical trials for a third drug which could possibly alleviate
Thank you. Minister.
condition for most people.
Thank you. Fulton McGregor anticipated what I was going to say. At the septiapterin, I don't think I've quite correctly pronounced that, is expected to launch in the UK in late 2027. There were some points made about national guidance, which I'm happy to write to members about regarding that, and also the home monitoring kits, which, as I understand it, are in a research phase in terms of demonstrating its efficacy and overall value. But I know the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer will be discussing that in her meeting next month. If I can just close. Families such as those known to Fulton McGregor and others in the Chamber and across Scotland show extraordinary resilience in managing PKU day in and day out. And I want to assure you that the Scottish Government remains deeply committed to improving outcomes and to making a real meaningful difference in the lives of everyone living with PKU or other rare conditions in Scotland.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.